Okay, so today's little experiment is going to be getting this 242B to work. I believe it's the B. No, C. Sorry, C. So the problem that we're having with this one is it does not want to light. It does not want to start. When I start it, you know, you open the quarter turn, you expect to hear a little bit of a spit, and then you'll light it and off you go, and then open it all the way and you're off to the races. Well, in this case, when you open it a quarter turn, it doesn't do anything except vent air the entire time. It never pulls up any fuel. And so I have pulled the whole thing apart, spare you the drudgery of going through all that. So we're basically looking at what sits inside here. So that's all been pulled out. So this is the fuel air stem that you may hear a lot of people talking about. And if you look in the bottom here, there's a little pin that sticks out the bottom. And then when you screw this all the way out, you should see that pin disappear, which in this case, it absolutely does. So nothing wrong with that. Everything seems to be working like it's supposed to. But for some reason, we're still not getting a lot of fuel up in here. So we'll just kind of go through this and see exactly what it is that is the problem. So one thing I've found with these is that the air passages within this get plugged over time. And if this is completely free, this will actually spin. And this one does not spin, and it looks to be there's a fair bit of rust and other kind of stuff in here. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can't remedy this. So we'll get the, these don't have any real particular size to them, so you always have to use a crescent wrench on them. So, or it doesn't have a standard size that's in my bunch of open end wrenches here. So we'll unscrew this, and that comes out quite nicely. Here's the pin. Here's the pin of the spring that, thanks to Frank, everybody on the planet says, stretch the spring and it'll solve all your problems. Frank absolutely knew what he was talking about. Some people that tell you to stretch the spring may not quite understand what they're actually doing. Stretching the spring will not help you with anything in the quarter turn from open department. If you go a quarter turn from open, this is still firmly seated down in there, so it's working as it should. So no amount of stretching that string is going to start solve any problems that have to deal with initial startup. Now, if you open the valve all the way open and it still kind of flickers and goes out and dies, that would be a stuck rod like this. Figure out who to show it to. That rod will be stuck in here, and it's still, even though the valve is retracted, it's not letting it go up and letting it get full fuel flow. So the spring only applies when you have problems with the valve 100% open. If it's the quarter turn open, or something else, and it's likely that the passages inside here are blocked. The way that these fuel air tubes work is that you have an outer tube and an inner tube. And so these little holes at the top is where the air goes in. So as long as this doesn't have any restrictions inside that tube, when this pin is fully seated, I just took the spring off just for ease of illustration, when that pin goes all the way down in here and it blocks the hole in the bottom, the only way that you can get the path of least resistance actually is through the top. So air then enters through the top, goes down the outside in between the two tubes, and then goes in the bottom and then goes up into the lantern itself. Because this is partially blocked by the pin, it's easier for it to suck air from the top than it is to pull fuel, so it tends to pull in more air than fuel. Once this rod goes up, this becomes the path of least resistance, and that air no longer wants to travel down there because it's easier for it to push the fuel up than it is for the air to travel through that little labyrinth. So that's what's going on. I hope that kind of helps everyone understand exactly how the fuel air tube actually works. So what I've done with these in the past, I've tried a couple of different things. I've tried sticking them in the ultrasonic cleaner, and that kind of sort of works, but not real great. I've tried boiling them in citric acid, and that kind of sort of works, but you can't get enough circulation inside of here. You can't get enough fluid moving around inside of here. And if I blow right now, I have some flow. It's actually not too bad. But it could be better. So what I've found out is that doing a heat and quench on this a couple of times will help blow out a bunch of junk that gets accumulated in between here. So that's what we're going to do today. So it's really simple. I have a cup of water. I have a small butane torch. I have the fuel air tube, which I'm going to put on top of the vise, and I got a pair of pliers to kind of grip it with, and so that way I can drop it into the water. I drop it into the water purposely one way and then the other because that will force water out of it, superheated water, and steam, which helps clean out those passages. So we'll do it a couple of different ways, and maybe we'll do some creative editing on here to speed this up, because it does take a minute or so for it to heat up, and you guys probably just get bored to tears. So some of this stuff we'll just do this. Okay. Drop it in there like that. If you start to see solder coming out, you may have heated a bit too much. You don't want to do that. So once you've got it in there, got a little bit wet, we'll do it again. The other thing too is that I really like using these butane torches. Butane torches do not run nearly as hot as a propane torch does. And that gives you a little bit more of a window to play with these things and not wreck them. Whereas when you do this with a propane torch, you may be about 1,000 degrees higher than butane. So keep that in mind when you're trying to decide what kind of torch you want to use when you're doing this. Now, as I'm doing this here, you'll see that we'll get the little puffs of steam coming in and out from one side or the other. And I'm just kind of chasing the water back and forth. When I stop seeing the steam, then I'm going to go ahead and quench it again. Do it that way. That was a good one. That's what you want to hear. A little bit of bubbling, a little bit of boiling, and get that to kind of clean up some. So we'll see how that looking here on the bottom. There's a little bit of rusty accumulation on the bottom of this. Just use my my brass brush. I have a stainless brush, but I don't use that because it's usually a little bit too aggressive. Brass on brass isn't going to hurt anything, and you can just brush away to your heart's content, and you're not going to damage anything. If you use stainless, you will start to remove the brass because the stainless is harder than the metal that you're brushing on. So this way, you're not going to damage anything, and it ends up working out pretty good. So let's see. Yep, gotta love that flavor. We'll give it another shot here, and then we'll see how it if it works any better. I was honestly expecting this to be a whole lot more plugged when I pull this thing out. So this may not solve my problem, which will be kind of weird, but I had another one that had this problem, and I did this to it, and it worked perfectly fine. But it was really plugged, and you may have remembered that on one of the other ones. I couldn't get any air through it whatsoever. All right, so we'll put it in here the other way this time. And that. Yeah, the only problem with blowing through these things is like since there's the copper content in here, you end up tasting pennies for the rest of the day. It's awful. Even though you don't touch it at all. Yeah, that seems to be pretty good. It's definitely flowing fine through there. So let me hit this with a bit of carb cleaner. We'll chase any kind of water out with this. Like so. Try not to spray it everywhere. Go with this. Maybe a little this way. Yep. Spray it all over myself too. It'll make sure my carb's clean then, I guess. Right, so that's about as much as we're going to do with that. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead, there's a little bit of green on this too. We're just going to kind of brush that off a little bit. It's just more discoloration than actually any kind of real buildup. So put this in here like so. The other thing I can do too is make sure that this passage is clear all the way through, which it seems to be. A good suggestion by Frank of Old Town Coleman was basically to put the pin in here through the backside and just kind of run in and out of there a few times to make sure that there's nothing in there that's blocking it. And this is extremely free and clear. So I will put the spring on this, put the pin in the hole, and then screw this back into the valve assembly. So get this in and then snug it down. So before you put these in back in the fount, always check to see that the operation of that pin is like it's supposed to be. With the valve all the way closed, you should see the pin protruding ever so slightly from the end of the fuel air tube. As you unscrew this, and it'll probably take about 2 turns, but you should see that pin drop, and it like drops like right there. And you can see I've barely got it out, but if I continue to go all the way out, it's very definitely out of the way, and there's a full flow through there, no problem with that at all. So yeah, so that should work just fine. The only thing I can think of would be an obstruction here somewhere, but that's not here. So I can pretty much safely put all this stuff back into the mount it, screw it back into the fount, and then go from there. If I do need to do anything else with it, I won't have to unscrew this because I've already gone through it. So we'll just go ahead and drop this back in here. I took a picture of this prior to disassembly, so I'm going to go look at that to make sure I clock it correctly. This may put some noise on the video because the phone will buzz, but yeah, I recommend definitely taking a picture so you get it clocked correctly. So this shows that the valve is to the right of the knob. So I will rig up my device here again so I can crank this down. And I just use like I've mentioned before, I use a bit of Felpro gasket material that you'd use for a car. And this is really thick, heavy cardboard, and I use that as a way to keep from marring up any of the brass when I reassemble here. So get this wedged in here. And yeah, I don't use any kind of valve sealant on these or thread sealant. I never have found that I need to. I've only, well, actually I think I've used it on one. It's pretty close. Just a tiny bit more. There we go. I have used it on one, but it's only been one. You know, sometimes you say, oh, that's perfect, and then you're like, no, actually it's not. So there we go. Now that should be right on. Yep, right on. But when you do use it, this is the one that I use, which is the Permatex Indian Head Gasket Shellac Compound. So it is it's a red goopy shellac, and it looks an awful lot like what they use from the factory. It's not the same thing, but it's close. So that you can find in your local auto parts store, easy to get a hold of. So what we'll do now is a rapid reassembly and a test to see if it works like it's supposed to. This will probably just all get speeded up. Okay, so all of that's together. We're going to go ahead, I'm going to fill it with this. This fuel's been pre-filtered, So I'm just gonna go ahead and pour it straight in. These little 242s are pretty great, but the small filler hole is doesn't work so well with the Coleman funnels. So this is all pre-filtered, and then I won't pour it all the way in to the bottom of the all the way down to the bottom of the bottle here. Yeah, I'll just leave that there. That should be enough. So hopefully this is going to give us a positive result. If not, then I get to look like a goofball on camera, which I guess is probably not the first time. Let's see, give her 20 or so pumps. I actually went with 30 because we're starting from dead unpumped. Let's see what happens. Okay, so let's not make a liar of me, okay? That would be really great. Yeah. So there we go. Nothing's happening. Not spitting or anything like that. I have another 242 that basically, like any other one, the second you turn it on, within a few seconds, you hear it spitting up fuel. So yeah, it's really interesting. So this is going to have to give me some more investigation time, and I'll have to take a look at it and understand what's going on, because we're definitely not getting any fuel up through the middle, even though nothing is blocked. So it's really curious. So we'll kind of jump back in when I figure out what it is. So yeah, we'll see how that works. Well, I guess, it was actually fine. So what happens sometimes when you do a completely cold startup after completely dumping everything out, it takes a little while to get that fuel back up in there. And obviously that was like a really long time that we were sitting there waiting. But the funny thing is of course, almost on cue, as soon as I stop the camera, sure enough, it starts to spit. So I was like, great, that's wonderful. So we just started it up, and it ran fine. I shut it down, cooled it completely down, and then and restarted it again. And it did take a while to kind of still get up there. So there still might be something at work in there, but it certainly isn't the fuel air tube. The next step I would do on this, which I may do, I may not, is to pull the valve and see if there's anything that's blocking in the valve body, if there might have been some crud that got up in there, because when I blew through it, it wasn't really passing a whole lot of air. The only reason I'm kind of not wanting to pull that out is because when you do that, you usually wreck the packing, and that gets to be a real problem to put that back in. I have multiple spare packings that I can put in there, courtesy of old Coleman parts, of course, and so I can do that, but it's still kind of a pain because you got to chop out the old one, get the new one in there, and it's just, yeah, it can be really kind of a challenge. So at the moment, we're going to let it run for a bit. Maybe getting it to circulate some fuel in there and out of there might be helpful for it. We'll see how that works. I might try throttling it back down and making it pull from that fuel air system a bit to see how that works. And maybe just a bit of use will kind of clear some of that stuff out. Just getting some fuel and some air to flow through that might help out. But at any rate, that's it. That's the 242 up and running. It's a beautiful lantern. I love these things. They run so nice. They're very, very bright. This is the 21A mantle. You can run the bigger mantles on them, like these 24As and the Peerless 24As, but I found that they're a little big, and it doesn't really drive them to full brightness. This 21A that's on here, and actually I think it's not really a 21A. I think I may actually be using one of the 2CHGs from Peerless on here. It is absolutely blinding. I can't look at it whatsoever. So yes, you can have a bigger mantle in there, but if you're not driving that mantle to full brightness, you're not really getting the benefit of it, and you just have a big mantle that's, a little more length. Maybe it's a little easier to break or whatever, I don't know. But I will tell you that putting 21As on here and letting it rip, it is, you can't look at it. You really need to have some shades. So, so that is it. Thanks for riding along on this one, and we'll see you on the next one. So until next time, keep them lit.